나사의 달기지 총책임자가 한국을 찾았습니다. 그가 공개한 계획은 단순히 다시 달에 착륙하겠다는 이야기가 아니었습니다. 사람이 장기간 살아갈 달의 도시와 산업 기반을 구축하고 그 거대한 프로젝트에 대한민국이 핵심 파트너로 참여할 수 있다는 청사진을 공개한 겁니다. 과연 나사는 왜 지금 한국을 주목한 걸까요? 오늘은 이번 강연에서 반드시 짚어봐야 할 핵심 내용만, 가장 중요한 부분만 골라 분석해 보겠습니다.
Systems we have today don't survive that stuff. We see Korea as a country that has the capability to have a major contribution to moon base. Why are we doing things like building the moon base? Number one, in the process of doing something that is near impossible, you're going to have to push capabilities across the board. Some of those are going to change the way we live here on Earth today. During Apollo, we all know all the things that were created new, and people talk about materials and things like that. I really focus on things like microelectronics. During the Apollo program, they had the technology of computing. It just happened to be for simple computations in a room perhaps of this size. They had to take that and put it in a box so they could put it in the spacecraft so they can send humans to the moon. So it made them, forced them to push technology in a way that nothing else would have. And in the process of that, innovation comes into play, and you start thinking how you can apply that to other things. So the technology push is what keeps us in the leading role in the world of using new technology for many different applications. The second one is groundbreaking science that we're going to be able to do in the moon. One of the reasons why we want to go to the South Pole is it's a very hard place to be, and especially if you want to achieve permanent presence. On the South Pole, you have more consistent illumination, but it's very hard because the sun only rises a few degrees. It leads to having things like permanently shadow craters, which may include volatiles like water and other things that have been there for billions of years. So unlocking some of those things, we can also reach some of the really old craters where we can find some of the geological features that will help us understand the development of the moon and the Earth-Moon system. So technology push, science that will allow us to understand where we live in, super important. But the third thing is what ties us back to Artemis 2. In the process of doing something that difficult, we're going to inspire millions of boys and girls to want to participate in this endeavor. Just like it inspired me, a kid from Spain that had no ties to NASA or anything like that, and I'm here today because of that reason. Any of you that are in science, STEM, or even journalism, but want to cover things like NASA and technology and space exploration, it will inspire the world when we do something like this. I look at the moon today and I'm thinking about the words from Reed, Jeremy, Christina, or Victor describing micrometeorite impacts, describing the colors when they got to the full eclipse of the sun, when they went around on the far side, describing the different craters that there were. That's what I think about when I see the moon. And it wasn't just me. It was the rest of the world kind of stop on its tracks and listen and paid attention to the mission in a way that we don't have the power to do in any other way. That was 4 hours of a flyby. Project that to landing on the moon with humans, sending them on expeditions in lunar terrain vehicles, getting them close to the rims of craters that may have those volatiles that are millions of years old, getting them to operate drones from the moon base. All of that stuff is going to change the world in the perspective of what they pay attention to. A lot of people think of a destination like an airport terminal looking building. Think beyond that. It's going to be a place where we have habitation clusters because that's where the crew will be living for extended periods of time. But then there's many assets. There's the infrastructure around them, including solar towers to generate power, and a nuclear reactor. We also have assets that will allow us to move things around, including lunar terrain vehicles that are working autonomously or transport the astronauts one place to another, pressurized rover that allows the astronauts to go a little bit farther from the habitation cluster to places where perhaps there's scientific objectives. There's then rovers and surface mobility assets that are working 24/7 to develop the capabilities that we need. For example, we know without the atmosphere, anything that lands on the moon, anything around that area is going to get blasted with regolith. So you can't really put your landing site next to your habitat. So it's going to have to be maybe 1.5 miles, 2 miles away. But we're not going to do that all at once. We're going to do that in phases. Phase 1 is going to be from now. It's already started through 2028. And in that phase, we're going to focus on learning as much as we can. So we're going to basically use that to learn how to get there, what works, what doesn't, and what really is happening on the moon. Phase 2, which goes from 2029 to 2032, is where we will be building the permanent infrastructure to support long-duration missions. Think about power, communications, navigation, surface mobility, preparing the sites for putting things like habitat. All of that stuff we'll do in Phase 2. And then in Phase 3, starting in 2032, we will be focusing on finishing that infrastructure, including the habitation modules that will keep the crews alive and well in their long-duration missions on the surface of the moon. So that's how we're going to build it, and we're in the middle of Phase 1 right now. In the process of building the moon base, we're going to focus on several things. One of the main objectives is to be a proving ground to learn everything we need to learn, from technology to logistics to the operational know-how before we send humans to Mars. Right now, we've been operating in low Earth orbit for 26 years straight without interruption. So we have mastered that, but low Earth orbit is just a few hours from home. The moon, it's 4 or 5 days away. And you're going into a place where illumination, thermal environment, regolith is a challenge. So it is going to be a huge step function from what we know how to do in low Earth orbit, even what we learned to do in Apollo, because we're going to the South Pole and we're not going there just to get there. We're going there to stay. So in order to take that leap and use that as a proving ground before we go to Mars, which is like 6 to 9 months away, we may be talking about 2-year round trip mission. So imagine the scale up of things you need to go from several hours, 4 or 5 days, to 6 to 9 months, maybe 2 years before you can get back. All of that stuff you can't just do at once. That's why the moon is so important step function before we get there. So what are the technologies we're going to be looking at? One of the most important challenges to go to Mars, staying there and coming back. Imagine having to take all the fuel and every single thing you need to live on Mars before you can come back home. So being able to use the materials that you find at your destination, it's huge in our ability to be able to go to Mars in missions that make sense, including bringing the people back. For example, being able to generate your own fuel and water and perhaps growing food. All of those things we're going to be looking at on the moon. So in situ resource utilization, we know that we have found water. How easy it is to get to it or process is a different story. All of that, and even in situ manufacturing, like can we build buildings there with the materials that we find, like maybe 3D printing, construction. Dust mitigation, super important because it will be a challenge that it gets on everything. Even the astronaut suits, anything you do in robotics is going to have to deal with that. Autonomous systems and robotics to do the preparations. Again, we're thinking long-term duration or permanent presence. We're going to need autonomy and we're going to need robotics for things to work for us 24/7. Excavation and construction definitely is something we're going to need to do for establishing the moon base and something we certainly want to master before we try to go to Mars. Survive the night capability. In the South Pole, you may see temperatures from plus 200 degrees Fahrenheit to minus 250 when you're in one of those shadows. And in the areas that we have permanent shadows or consistent shadows, it could be down to minus 400 degrees. Systems we have today don't survive that stuff. Developing technology to allow those things to stay there for a long duration mission, it's an absolute must. Phase 1, so we can learn more about those assets, and they need to be like that for Phase 2 because they'll be part of permanent infrastructure. And then, of course, nuclear surface power is something that we know we're going to have to achieve if we want to get up to the 100 kilowatt type of generation systems, which is what we think we're going to need. Phase 2, if you're an astronaut, there's more assets that have shown up when you are on the surface of the moon looking around. You came in your Artemis human landing system, and what you find is there's several landers that are already there. You've already been preparing the terrain, and you're starting to basically place your infrastructure, especially on power. Not just the power generation aspect of it, but the power grid that eventually you will connect to your habitats and all the assets. We want to start heavy on power so we can make those nodes where different other assets can come in and recharge or hibernate so they can survive the night themselves. We'll have the pressurized rover that we're working together with JAXA on, which will allow the crews to move in farther distances, and maybe we'll be thinking about doing that nuclear reactor. And then we'll have the next generation of all the things that we tested in phase one, like lunar terrain vehicles, rovers that they can more effectively prepare the ground and stage the infrastructure. All of those things will be part of what phase two looks like. And when we're talking to the Korean Space Agency, hopefully we'll find those areas to collaborate with big elements, whether it's surface mobility or some aspects of power generation. You certainly have strong industry in all of those fields. So we're going to want you to think alongside of us on this aspect of try, learn, redeploy. You could develop capability that transforms the way we live here on Earth by trying to do it in a much harder environment.
Thank you, Carlos, for that wonderful speech. Maybe can we give him another round of applause, please? Yeah. Next we're going to move right into our fireside chat, which I'm expecting to take about 45 minutes. Yes, so to take a closer look at what it really takes to sustain a long-term presence in the moon base and in more detail, as well as how Korea and the US can collaborate in this building strategic space partnership. So leading the discussion will be today will be Professor In Soo-jeon from Seoul National University, who brings years of experience.
So let's turn to Director Kang, hear about Korea's broad vision and the long-term roadmap. For Carlos and for those of us here today, could you give us a broad picture of Korea's vision for space exploration? What are the key priorities, and where do you hope Korea will be in the years ahead, 5 to 10 years from now?
I can very briefly introduce the key objective of our national space exploration policy and the roadmap. Korea is pursuing a long-term strategy guided by two core visions: expanding human knowledge and fostering the space economy. A key objective of Korea's lunar exploration strategy is to help our domestic industry rapidly acquire deep space capability and become an active partner in the global lunar supply chain. To achieve this, we plan to aggressively support private sector-led R&D and create opportunities for companies to gain hands-on flight demonstration experience. Specifically, we aim to execute a series of milestone missions, beginning with a lunar communication satellite in 2020, followed by a small lunar lander demonstration in 2030, a cislunar exploration mission in 2030, and a public lunar landing mission in 2030. Through this phased approach, we plan to validate technology for lunar infrastructure and resource utilization, while positioning Korean companies as key suppliers in the emerging global lunar economy.
Wow, there's a lot to happen in the next few years. But the global space landscape is very quickly changing these days. The United States and NASA now is placing much greater emphasis on mission to the lunar surface rather than focusing on lunar orbit. So let's turn back to you, Carlos, here what this shift means for NASA's plan for the future of lunar exploration.
We knew that the objective all along was to go to the lunar surface, but we have built an architecture that included an orbital station. The more we started working and maturing that architecture, going to the NRHO orbit was a performance penalty for the landers. Certainly, Gateway was going to accomplish some technology maturation and risk reduction gaps for things like missions to Mars. that you can only do in an orbital thing, but it was not directly tied to what we need to build a permanent outpost on the surface. So while we would like to continue that, it was a shift of focus. It was about focusing all the resources, people, money, skills to going straight into anything that's needed for the lunar surface, and we deprioritize orbital outposts that can support humans. We're still going to have orbital assets to support moon base, but not for humans.
Building a moon base isn't something any one nation can do alone, so it will take close collaboration with technologies from many different countries, many partners, working together seamlessly. So that brings us to an important question for Director Kang. How Korea and NASA, United States, build a deeper technology partnership to make that vision a reality. So from your perspective, what should be the first major milestone for the US-Korea space partnership that you're envisioning?
Not easy questions, but anyway, I fully agree with your view that the US-Korea space partnership should evolve from a declaratory framework into a true technological alliance. To further strengthen the US-Korea space partnership, Korea is committed to actively expanding our lunar exploration initiatives and increasing support for related programs. Through these efforts, we aim to foster a vibrant exploration ecosystem.
달기지는 더 이상 미국만의 프로젝트가 아닙니다. 통신과 전력, 로봇과 이동수단, 그리고 새로운 우주산업까지. 대한민국이 어떤 선택을 하느냐에 따라 달에서 우리의 역할과 존재감도 크게 달라질 수 있습니다. 앞으로도 미래소년 우주과학은 대한민국과 세계 우주 개발이 어떻게 변화하는지 가장 중요한 흐름만 끝까지 추적해 전해드리겠습니다.